Good morning, everybody. My name is Dan Aberhart. I'm president of Aberhart Ag Solutions, and with me today I have a couple amazing panelists to fill out the subject matter, talking about the last 5 years of Bio-Sul on Aberhart Farms. With me today is my little brother, Terry Aberhart. How are you doing this morning, Terry?
Pretty good. Pretty amazing.
Awesome. So Terry's partner in Aberhart Ag Solutions, and he's going to tell us a little bit more about his other companies and what they do and what they specialize in, certainly since it pertains to the subject matter here today. And also with us is the amazing Jill Debenham from A&L Labs. Good morning, Jill.
Morning.
Jill and I and A&L Labs have been working together on a way to synthesize the data that's been collected. And stay on the line because we have a very cool offer for everyone at the end of this. So I'm going to play a short video and then we'll get into the agenda. Here we are. We're all working from home and under the new circumstances. And I'm going to get Terry to share a little bit about his thoughts with the new protocols for social distancing and self-isolation on the farm. I think that'll be of interest to everybody in the Bio-Sul Nation. Today, what you're going to get a brief overview by myself of Bio-Sul, the product. You're going to hear about the insights from 5 years of Bio-Sul on the farm. And the extraordinary thing that we can provide to you today is all this great data that Terry is so keen on collecting. There's so many metrics going on the Aberhart Farms that Terry has been presenting his precision data methods all around the world. So you guys are going to get a glimpse under the hood at what that looks like as it pertains to sulfur, particularly today. And then we're going to offer you the opportunity and instructions how to do your own farm assessment with Bio-Sul and offer an amazing deal for you to do that very simply and easily and collect similar data to what Terry's going to present today. So stay tuned for that special offer at the end. And I'll also offer to anybody that stays to the bitter end, there's going to be a personal message from President Donald Trump. Believe it or not, this is true. And anybody that was around in the beginning will know that I'm not kidding around. So we've introduced our panelists already, Terry Aberhart and Jill Debenham, and Elston, who is working on joining us on the call, hopefully. I'm going to give you guys a quick overview of Bio-Sul. The brilliant innovation of Bio-Sul, that's two very simple things combined to make something greater than the whole, which is compost and what we're calling these days nutrimental sulfur or elemental sulfur. So the purpose of the composts with the elemental sulfur is to be a carrier, to get that sulfur to the soil, essentially as a soil health amendment, as nutrition. And this is a view of the composting production facility on the Global Transportation Hub outside of Regina, Saskatchewan. Homegrown, Canadian-made folks. We have probably 15,000, 20,000 metric tons of sulfur ready to go this spring. This is a rather extraordinary homegrown innovation. By putting these two things together, we've got a slow-release product that we can apply on the soil in high rates to last multiple years. And the beauty is that the product releases in conjunction with good growing conditions. So you can see the production facility here where the elemental sulfur comes in, gets blended with the compost. The compost goes to work biologically to break down that mineral-like quality of the elemental sulfur. And you end up with a product that has varying particle sizes, which is the key to it agronomically. So the particles that are less than 150, 200, 250 microns are very dust-like. They're that small. That's about the width of a human hair. And it is essentially immediately available. It is like taking cash out of an ATM. That sulfur is going to be available first year. And then as you go up in particle size, those particles release slower. And that's where we really attain our long format where we're providing sulfur to the soils through all crops for multiple years. And the surprising thing is just how much sulfur it takes to grow high yields in a rotation like Terry has, which he'll talk about. But our strategy is essentially horseshoes and hand grenades. Carpet bombing, we're using an oversupply of sulfur given the price point. We're building our soils, which is a great theme as well, doing it sustainably. So we're going to put down 10 acres per ton. We're going to put down 220 pounds of product, and it's 00070 analysis. That's going to give you over 150 pounds of actual S. And the neat thing is that that's going to supply you immediately and into the future, 4 to 6 years. And we're going to see today exactly how you measure those results and what that looks like, because we should be seeing high percentage of sulfur in our plants. We should be seeing great N-to-S ratios. We should be seeing less sulfur deficiency as we continue to increase yields. So all these things work together brilliantly to provide you a really neat, cost-effective, agronomically sound, sustainable source of sulfur. And you can see how it's getting loaded here for delivery into super bees. And then we get into the spreading of it, which is kind of a unique side of the product as well. So technically speaking, the product stores outside. It's sort of handled like lime. It's an aggregate. Through the inventiveness of our network of trusted applicators, we have 40 plus of those entities, retailers, applicators in the network. They've found lots of innovative ways to get this to the customer's fields, as you can see, with all kinds of different machines. But note that they're all spin spreaders. So this product has to be spun on, and that is due to the variable particle size, and there's some moisture in the product due to the compost. And so we're dispersing all of these particles onto the soil surface, allowing it to oxidize, typically get spread on top, although it can be incorporated. And what you've got is the fines accurately spread. And how we measure that is through pan testing, and a very simple method where pans get set out at a measured distance and poured into vials, so that we can measure not only the consistent volume across the pattern, but we want to have the variety of particle sizes. Ensure we get these both in the beginning and the lifespan of the application. It's a biological process, how the sulfur is released into the soil, so it takes good temperature, moisture, and oxygen to release. And the cool thing is that happens in conjunction with good growing conditions. So that ensures a good sulfur supply. And if it's too wet, if it's too dry, if there's no biological activity going on in the soil, hence nothing's really growing, that sulfur stays in the bank for another day, and it doesn't leach until it becomes available, which is a big distinction from your manufactured synthetic high salt bulky index fertilizers such as AMS. So this is really a natural solution. This is a sustainable solution. It's a cost-effective one, and we've had a lot of fun bringing that to the market. So that is my brief Bio-Sul overview. And there's Elston. Good morning.
Morning.
Elston's sporting a beard too.
Not really. Look close. There's about 1 hair per square meter, but anyway.
It's a good hockey playoff attempt.
Yeah, it started with baseball and it's continuing, so that's good.
How did I do on my summary of Bio-Sul, Elston, on a scale of 1 to 10?
Well, it sounds like you've been listening. Remarkable. Remarkable.
An Aberhart listening? Not talking?
I would say it was a solid 9.3.
I've got more good comments about my hair, and also comment Dan for Prime Minister. Nope, Elston has better hair. My hair just might get that long, and I'm kind of interested. I have a good excuse to grow my hair out and grow my beard out. Thanks for joining us, Elston. So Elston's going to backfill a little bit of the conversation as Terry presents what's happened on Aberhart Farms. But Terry, before you get into the 5 years of Bio-Sul on Aberhart Farms, quickly, what's going on at Aberhart Farms to prepare for the spring, and how are you guys dealing with COVID-19?
Yeah, so good morning, everyone. Glad to be here. For the most part, we're kind of somewhat business as usual, getting ready for spring, but definitely taking certain precautions. I guess was on a good peer group call with the Power Farm group last week, and we had some good discussion between the different farms on this. But Yeah, right now, obviously, we have all of our sure grow staff, our consulting staff are working from home and using Zoom and those kind of things, and trying to, stay away from contact. And at the farm, I guess we're trying to keep everybody either distanced out in the yard or in the shop, and rotating lunches and coffee breaks and stuff. So we've got lots of space in the lunchroom when people are coming through, and looking at not trying to jam people into, all into one truck to head somewhere if need be. So just a few of those things, talking about planning to have, some backup resources. But yeah, one of the things we were talking about this morning a little bit is that, if someone gets sick, theoretically the whole crew would get quarantined, right? So some different things to think about that could be a bit of a challenge. Might be teaching my young kids that aren't in school how to run drills and stuff if that happens. Yeah, we're trying to, I guess the main thing is just to communicate to everybody every day and check in with everybody and share thoughts on how to best protect our team and ensure people stay at home if they're not feeling well. So.
Yeah, certainly bringing the team closer in new ways on a daily basis, I'm finding. And yeah, we got to support each other through this time, because it's important to keep our motivation up and support each other. So the journey here, where we are today with this data that you're going to present today, Terry, was inspired by Matt Gosling. We did a webinar last August where Matt had presented his thousands and thousands and thousands of data points from tissue tests and soil tests that they had synthesized with their research people. And so what we've done is we've emulated that on Aberhart Farms, and that's what Terry's going to share this morning. And Nelson's going to help inform us agronomically, and then Jill's going to tell us how you can go about it with our special offer. So Terry, take it away. Tell us a little bit about what you've found agronomically, logistically, economically on the farm here with Bio-Sul in the last 5 years.
Cool. Yeah, for those of you that don't know me, we own and operate Aberhart Farms along the Manitoba-Saskatchewan border, 50,000 grain farm, and been running a agronomy consulting business for going into the 13th year now. Pretty passionate about precision agriculture, but also just really passionate about how to make things work for the grower. And I think that's one of the unique perspectives that we bring, is because not only are we running a, fairly high-end, agronomy service and trying to push the boundaries there, we operate a large farm as well. And so can kind of put the proof in the pudding. And I think a lot about the logistics of agronomy and making things, simple that work for the growers. So this is one of the reasons initially, anyways. The thing that I love about elemental sulphur, as you alluded to it, whatever form it may be, it's ultimately a superior way to supply your sulphur. You get season-long release. It kind of releases more if you have good growing conditions. And it's one of the very, very few things that a farmer has to deal with that you can put on ahead of time for multiple years and not worry about it and get that logistics issue out of the way. So we were working with elemental sulphur for a few years before Bio-Sul came along. So it was an easy switch to us to move to the same kind of elemental program, but get the benefits of buying a product that's better for the environment and a story and a system that we get a little pressure from the public on how we're farming and our practices. And so I think it was a really easy switch. And I think there's other, intrinsic benefits that come along with that. But anyways, I'm going to share a little bit about our experience with Bio-Sul and the yields on our farm over the last 5 years. So I guess at the end of the day, what really it comes down to is what's the yield or what's your end result for the most part. There's lots of different factors to look at, but this is just a chart over the last 6 years actually, and looking at the average yields across our farm for barley, wheat, and canola, which are our three main crops. And you can see that we've had some pretty good production years in the last few years, and we've been hitting new yield records in most crops quite a bit in the last last 3 years. So I think it's a bit of a accumulation of a lot of different things that we're doing on the farm, but Bio-Sul is definitely one part of that. And as we continue to grow these bigger yields, they're going to require more nutrients. And more nutrients requires, more stuff in the drill, more logistics to the field. And as we keep pushing boundaries, it's going to be harder and harder to put everything down in one pass without dragging a grain bin behind your drill. So those are things that we need to think about. So this just simply thanks to Matt and his crew for helping compile this data for us as well. But this just shows the sulfur levels, tissue test sulfur levels in all of the fields on Aberhart Farms going back all the way to 2006 in the various different crops. But yeah, we can definitely see in 2015 was the first year that we started to use Bio-Sul, where we switched from Tiger 90 was what we were using before as elemental sulfur to Bio-Sul. And we can see that even with the previous elemental program, we still had some low tests in the yellow, and it's pretty plain to see that once we started switching over to Bio-Sul, we had higher and higher or better tests in the various different crops. So that's been really cool to see, and it took us 3 years, I guess, to get the whole farm covered. And I guess where we started going down this road is we initially, through the consulting group, working with our clients, we had a lot of growers going to products like MES-Z or MES-Zinc, the phosphorus with some sulfur in it. That kind of worked well for variable rate programs and different things like that. But you're essentially paying a premium for that product to have it combined into one prill, and it's a little bit more bulky. So you're adding more fills to your drill. And so even on those type of programs, what we noticed a lot with our tissue test program with growers is that mid-season on really good growing years where that yield potential is high, even though we might have 20 or 30 pounds of sulfur total in the program, we were still running low on our tissue tests. And then when you run low kind of at that peak season and the canola is starting to bolt or flowering already and those kind of things, it's kind of hard to have the time to react and go try to capture that extra yield. And where we had strong elemental programs, the elemental sulfur seemed to kick in and release harder, and our tissue tests would be good. So not only are guys paying premium dollars for those other programs, they also had a lot more fills and slow down the seeding logistics, and they're still not getting the sulfur supply that they need when they need it. So this is one of the reasons where I don't think we've really run into an issue with sulfur supply on any of our elemental programs, and nothing that I've seen for sure on the Bio-Sul programs that we're running. So that's given us a lot of confidence, and even into the fifth year here, which we'll see. So here's just a graph of the soil test levels, the parts per million of sulfur across the whole farm. So you can see probably back in 2009, 2010 is when we probably started to work with Tiger. And then that started bringing sulfur levels up. We started switching to Bio-Sul in 15, and there's a bit of a dip through 16 and 17. I'm not sure exactly why that is, if it was a lab change, or I know we've been switching out some zones and a little bit different sampling methods on some fields. And one thing to note, Elsa might comment on this, obviously sulfur parts per million on a soil test can be extremely variable. That's why we do look quite a bit at tissues. That's kind of what I like to use as a guideline in season for sulfur. But either way, this just still shows a baseline, and we can see, generally speaking, we have really good overall farm levels of sulfur. So doesn't seem to be any issue there, and that's good to see. But like I said, out of the things that we look at, mainly would be tissue tests, and then the yield of the crop, and parts per million on the soil test is just kind of a bit of an afterthought in my mind, but it's good to see as well.
Terry, maybe
this is a little bit of a comparison that we did a few years ago when we first started working with Bio-Sul. And what this is just an aggregate of all the different tissue tests on various different crops across the farm. And so down at the bottom, you can see, I guess it's in 2012 initially, in 2013, 2014 was kind of before we started with Bio-Sul in the red there. We had anywhere from 0.6 to 0.5 kind of average farm tissue test levels of sulfur. And when we start looking at 2016 and 2017, when we have more or less the whole farm covered by then, our average tissue test level went up to 0.72 with Bio-Sul. So that was almost a 25% increase in supply to the crop. And obviously in that too, we're not seeing any more of those times where we get a little bit low at that peak season and maybe end up limiting yield potential. So for me, what I like about this strategy is you're buying one of the cheaper sources of sulfur to supply to your field. You're getting lots there. And so when the conditions are right and the crop can use it or need it, it seems to kind of be there. There's more microbial activity, more root growth, all that stuff. And it helps make that sulfur more available to the plant. And it just seems to work really well. So that's kind of what we've seen on this program here.
Terry, can we just pause there? I think Elston had some comments on your previous slide.
Sure.
So I think it's really important to stress here for the group that's on the call is that the best way to identify whether or not you have sulfur issues in your fields is to use tissue tests, not soil tests, because of the extreme variability of sulfur in soils across fields, and especially in environments like Terry's, where he has a lot of topography and a lot of salinity issues and stuff like that. And sulfur is, more specifically, sulfur is a mobile nutrient in the soil. That's sulfate sulfur, not as elemental, but as sulfate sulfur. It's mobile. So that means sulfur can move down, it can move sideways, and it can move up. And so when you're in an area that has a fair bit of topography and a fair bit of salinity, those factors all contribute to some of the variability that you might be seeing in this soil test graph. Nevertheless, given the number of samples and the number of years in fields and zones, it's pretty obvious to me that the program that Terry is involved in, just like Matt and his crew over the years, the soil test values are going up. Having said that, the best way to identify whether you're heading in the right direction or the wrong direction is not by using soil tests, it's by using tissue tests. And that point needs to be hammered home over and over and over and over again, because the plant integrates the environment. The results that come from a tissue test are far less variable than the results that come from a soil test. To give you an idea, if you're taking 20 cores per zone or per field, just one core in that zone can throw out the entire result for the 20 cores. Terry's sitting in Langenberg, but if this virtual meeting was a field, Terry could be sitting on, 2,000 parts per million of sulfur, and all of the rest of us could be sitting on 10 parts per million of sulfur. One core of Terry mixed with all of the rest of us skews the results dramatically. So I just thought I'd hammer that point home. There's a lot of people on the call. I'm sure most people know that, but some of the folks might not recognize that.
That's a great point, Elson. I think there's a common misconception out there that you'll be able to see that 150 pounds of actual S when you put it down. But in fact, on a soil test, you are not going to be able to physically see any sulfur until it converts to sulfate, correct?
Well, that's the other piece. Exactly. You have been listening very, very well. Good for you. You get a gold star. But that's you put on nutrimental sulfur, and everybody thinks then your sulfur level should automatically increase. Well, the soil test for sulfur does not measure nutrimental sulfur, elemental sulfur. It only measures sulfate sulfur. So there's a big misconception about that out there. So very, very well done, Dano. Very well done.
Thank you. I also wanted to iterate a point. Terry can make it a lot more eloquently than me, but what happens, Terry, when you collect enough data, regardless of the calibration of the unit, a la Google?
Yeah, I was going to comment on that as well. But yeah, obviously the more data that you have, the more consistent the result is. And one of the things that kind of learned over the last couple of years is seeing a really actually cool presentation from Farmers Business Network that, initially thinking about yield data going in and things like that, if it's all over the place, it's all junk, it's no good. But they kind of proved through their presentation that once you get a large enough data set, basically all the errors get averaged out because you have some that are low and some that are high. And once you get a very, very large data set, it becomes extremely accurate, even with things not calibrated and a lot of errors. And so I always kind of use the analogy of the GPS on your phone, right? It's not very accurate if you're just using it to try to pinpoint one single spot. But when Google can aggregate 20,000 cell phones in a couple city blocks, they can make a very, very accurate traffic flow map, right? And so this is the same kind of concept. So we don't have millions of data points in this data here, but we do have on our farm 240 zones that we sample every single year. So it's a pretty significant data set that's being averaged. And on the tissue test side of things, I'm a bit of a tissue test addict. It's a bit of an issue with me at times, but we normally do anywhere between 60 and 70 tissue tests a year. So when we're looking at this kind of data, we're looking at quite a few points of data. It's not just 5 or 10 tests in 1 year across various crops. So that was just a couple years here, and then this is actually a comparison of the full farm now, and I think I can see. Does it say the 5-year Bio-Sul fields?
What I'm seeing right now here is all crops tissue test results.
I had a bar block in there. I'm having a little bit of issues with my computer here.
All good.
Yeah, this is all crops, so we can see that. In 2014, we were at 0.51% in the sulphur on the tissue tests. And then 2015 was when we started the Bio-Sul programs on the farm. So we see a slight little bump there. We see it much more into 2016 and 2017. And then in 2019, we see a small kind of dip in the curve. This is probably just a reflection of some of the first year Bio-Sul fields coming down a little bit. And so then this is the 5-year Bio-Sul fields. This is where the rubber hits the road, or everyone's wondering, will it last 5 years? What does it look like? So we can see in 2014 was before Bio-Sul, the average was 0.39. 2015, the first year that we put it on, we had really good response. And just to be full disclosure, when we first started with Bio-Sul, of course, we ended up making a plan to apply in the spring of 2015. And of course, we had great intentions of spreading that before we seeded. And that didn't really happen as the logistics of the world came in. And so we actually spread the first 3,000 acres of land that we covered in June when the canola was already out of the ground. And even with that, we still had, as you can see, almost double the level of sulfur increase in tissues. And so most of the early applications we made were actually in season in the same year, just because we did custom work and other stuff for other clients first. And we've had a lot of experience with that, and I'm very confident about the first year release and not having to worry about a bridge strategy and those kind of things. But anyways, you can see the data here, and there's a little bit of up and down based on variability of weather and yields and moisture. 2017 was a much drier year, maybe a little bit slower release there, but the levels was still really good. 18 kind of bumps back up, and then we can see 19 starting to come back down again. So I think what I read out of this is, it's probably time to reapply again, which we did. So that's kind of the skinny on that. And that kind of finishes my comments or presentation on the sulphur stuff. We take some questions or discussion if there is, and or let Elson add his comments now. So
it's likely worthy to note that you had a bunch of slides that's probably beyond the scope of this discussion here today, but they addressed the micronutrient levels in the plant as well. So that's something that you can see from the tissue tests, and we expect that Bio-Sul long-term is going to help release all the nutrients in the soil, and a lot of our long-term customers have seen better release of the other nutrients, and something that sulfur does that maybe Elson can confirm. Hopefully I've been listening well enough, but it helps release everything else, all the other nutrients in the soil.
Well, a couple of comments here before I get into that piece, because that's a really interesting and useful piece of information. Number one, Terry stated it, but for the group, we've known for years that large applications of nutrimental sulfur, whether they're in the fall, on limited amounts of snow, in the spring or after seeding, will work about the same. Of course, the odd year we have, a drought or whatever, you got to take that into account. But fall is not the only time that you can apply. You can apply basically any time. Any time's a good time to apply nutrimental sulfur. It's the way I've been thinking about it for years and years. The second piece, with the release of the other nutrients, and this is especially true on higher pH soils, it happens in all soils, but it's more pertinent for high pH soils, is that when nutrimental sulfur starts to be broken down from elemental to sulfate sulfur by the organisms in the soil, in that zone around the particle of sulfur, there's a three-dimensional halo where the pH drops. And in that halo, lowering of pH solubilizes a bunch of nutrients that would otherwise not be available to the plant. So, phosphorus becomes more available. Any of you guys that have been using Jumpstart or Tag Team, it's the same process, but with a different bug. All of the micronutrients, with the exception of molybdenum, become more available. Calcium, magnesium, potassium, in that halo of acidulation around the particles that are in the soil, those nutrients become solubilized and more available. And I would say in 8 to 8.5 out of 10 tissue samples where we have direct comparisons, the levels, most other nutrients go up quite dramatically because of that effect. And this isn't something that's new. This is old news from many years ago as well. So there's plenty of that kind of information in the literature if people want to check it out. And that's a really important feature of any nutrimental sulfur product. And in this case, Bio-Sul, we're whacking it on at 220 pounds of product per acre. What did you say, Dan? It's hand grenades and horseshoes?
Horseshoes and hand grenades.
Yeah. So, it's a great strategy for lots of different reasons. And it just turns out that this is another thing. Another thing that I might want to say here, unless there's some questions to this point, is that I was at an event recently where Ishmael Chakmak was speaking. And it's kind of funny that I'm usually trying to keep up to him, but in this case, some of the findings that he was getting was catching up to us. He reiterated, and so for the people in the crowd that don't know Ishmael Chakmak, he's the best plant physiologist on the face of the earth, literally. He comes from Turkey, and for some strange reason over the years we've become friends, and he was showing some of his research results that were basically saying when a plant has lots and lots of sulfur in it, it creates phytoalexins, glutathione. It actually turns some of the sulfate sulfur back into elemental sulfur and creates a plant antibiotic. He used fancier words, but that's the way I look at it. And so at the end of the day, if a plant is loaded with sulfur, it's able to fight stress much, much better. What he also showed, though, and this is brand new research, is that when, over the years, people have thought that the controller of stomata was some combination of potassium and chloride. It turns out it's cysteine. And for those of you that remember the sulfur amino acids that Bio-Sul impacts, cysteine and methionine are the two sulfur-based amino acids that are critical to the production of proteins and all other amino acids. It turns out that cysteine is actually the controller of the stomata. That in conjunction with a hormone called ABA, not the group, but the hormone called ABA. And so what does that mean to you guys? Well, what it means to you guys is that if a plant is loaded with sulfur, it's got all of these defense mechanisms that I talked about that handle stress, but now it also has a better method of dealing with drought. Because if the signaler of drought conditions is cysteine, and your plant's loaded with sulfur and it's loaded with cysteine, then you're going to have a much better control mechanism of the stomata in your plant, and so you're going to actually get better use of water and everything else. And I found that to be quite cool. So
Has everybody got that? Just took the off ramp to whoosh. I got to listen more because I'm not that smart. I was going to listen to your recording in slow motion about the cysteine and methionine. But we need to keep going here and wrap this up. So I'm going to ask some quick questions. Guys, you got to be super succinct. We got 15 minutes left, and I want Jill to make a bit of a presentation. So Terry and or Elston, for calculating the timeline to reapply Bio-Sul, can you just do the math on removal rates of the crop, or will it not be that accurate? Go.
You do a mass balance, you know what the yields were, you know how much sulfur is being removed from the field, and you take tissue tests, and those two simple methods will nail it every time.
What about the timing of the tissue tests? Will the levels not be different at different stages of growth?
Yes.
Awesome. And then the last question I have is about variable rate. Terry, I think you can, well, I have another one here, but hit the variable rate talk, Terry, quick.
Yeah, so on the variable rate side of things, simply we look at two concepts. One is you have variable yield potential across the field, right? So where you have lower yield potential, you're not going to need as much sulfur. There's less sulfur being removed by that crop over time. And where you have higher yield potential, you're going to have higher. So simply you can do a variable rate program based on that. The other thing is a lot of times in our part of the world, the lower yield potential areas are the lower, more saline areas. And sulfur is mobile in the field and in the soil. And typically there is higher levels of sulfur already in that area. And then your side slopes and your hilltops sometimes are a little bit lighter soil. Your hilltops might be a little bit more sandy. And so they're going to have the most leaching and also probably be the lowest sulfur in a soil test as well. So, doing a simple program that way, makes sense. Another, just a couple quick comments from the questions that I see. Daryl had asked about, how do you know if there's enough Bio-Sul available in the spring versus the previous fall? Well, I think I kind of answered that. We've done lots on our own farm as well as other farms in the spring and follow tissue tests very closely, and they've always been good. So I have no qualms about that at all. Another question is, when you take tissue tests on VR fields, which zones are you sampling from? So normally we're sampling in the medium to higher productive zones. We don't sample in those low zones because we know they're going to be really high with sulfur and those kind of things. And we've done some zone sampling, but most is kind of an average that good area of the field. And then the last question that I've seen here was just, have you ever put down compost as a control manner to understand the benefit that comes from the Bio-Sul compost? So to my knowledge, we haven't done that. It's actually kind of a good idea or suggestion, but we haven't done trials with just the compost only to see what benefit would maybe come from the compost on its own. But that's it on that.
Okay, we have a question about elemental sulfur on sandy soils. Excuse me. If we apply elemental sulfur on those spots, will the ES acidify all the time, which will cause leaching of the sulfur?
Okay, so elemental sulfur has been used for hundreds of years in high leaching environments for that very, very reason. Elemental sulfur, when it's in that form, is not leachable. It's only leachable when it gets converted to sulfate sulfur. So I'm not sure I've answered the question. That is one of the big advantages historically of elemental sulfur use, is that when it's in the elemental form, it's not leachable. It's only leachable when it gets converted to sulfate sulfur. So there's a built-in biological mechanism there that prevents the sulfur that's applied from being leached. And back to the tissues, I was being flippant. Of course, the sulfur levels in plants are going to be different at different growth stages. And Jill's probably going to help us out a little bit. But the best time to tissue test is at about the physiological equivalent of flag leaf in cereals. So early bloom in canola, that sort of thing. And the beauty of that is if you're tissue sampling at that stage to track sulfur, you're also going to get a whole bunch of other data back that you can also react to. So maybe your nitrogen's a little bit low. You can get in and spruce up your nitrogen and your sulfur if you need to. So the best timing in my mind to get the biggest bang for your buck, once you have some understanding of tissue analysis and interpretation, is the physiological equivalent of about flag leaf in cereals.
Well, we're kind of running out of time here. I wish we could answer all the questions, but there's one question I did want to answer really quickly. What about disease testing the compost for clubroot and all that jazz? The compost itself is Class A compost, which means it's certified as a soil amendment. That means it's free of foreign debris. It's free of pathogens. It's free of bad stuff. So we can put it on the soil in high rates with no detriment to the soil. It's got to be certified through the Compost Council of Canada. And as for clubroot, composting is the perfect solution. It literally bakes the life out of clubroot. Clubroot cannot exist in the composting environment. When you bake that cake at 60 degrees centigrade for 8 weeks, there is no clubroot left, nor is there ever any sources which would contain clubroot that's going into our production. Our current production, the compost is being sourced from brown matter from the city of Saskatoon. There's no agricultural sources to transmit the clubroot. And all of our compost is free of anything, weed seeds, anything that would be detrimental to the farmer. And we certainly would never have put our family name on anything that we would have knowingly contained anything that would be less than beneficial to everybody in hashtag Western Canadian Ag. So we need to get to Jill. Poor Jill. She can't get a word in edgewise here. I apologize, Jill.
Good.
Can we hear a little bit from you and what you do and what we're going to offer to everybody here today?
Sure.
Hey, while Jill's doing this, I'm just going to say one thing that's kind of been missed, and that it has to do with compost as well. So there are certain organisms within Bio-Sul that speed up or allow the oxidation conversion of elemental sulfur to sulfate sulfur. The compost is the home for the special organisms that are in Bio-Sul. So that's an important thing to remember too. Typically, other elemental sulfur products require the organisms to come from the soil. With Bio-Sul, there's organisms within the compost. So I just thought I'd throw that in there. Sorry, Jill.
No problem. So good morning, everyone. My name's Jill. I am the business rep for A&L Canada. I look after southern and eastern Saskatchewan as well as all of Manitoba. I live near Kennedy, Saskatchewan, for anybody that knows where that is. And so just a little bit about our lab. Our lab is based in London, Ontario, and we offer a full line of ag testing services as well as analytical information. So this is just kind of a snap of some of the services we offer, definitely not all of them, but it ranges from soils, disease, pesticides, water, feed, tissues. Our turnaround time on soils is 3 days once it's received and 1 business day on tissues. So I'm just kind of going to focus on plant tissue testing, obviously. And the 2 reasons why we want to test is to troubleshoot, is to identify problem areas, potentially early enough that we can try to fix them, and as well as crop monitoring. So remove that guesswork out of what's going on in the crop and if it has enough fuel to get it to the yield that you want to shoot for. So this analogy is a perfect one. We're always checking our gauge as to where we're going to make sure we have enough fuel to get to our destination. So why aren't we checking our crops to make sure that those plants have enough fuel to get to the end goal of what you want them to produce? So in terms of nutrient concentrations, when you get your results back, obviously you want to have sufficient levels to maximize your yield expectations. And it kind of 2 ends of the spectrum where it's deficient, which sometimes you can see those visual disorders, and to very high levels, which can become toxic. So the crop monitoring process is to sample early so you can identify those nutrient levels and come up with an action to correct those, as well as to monitor your levels throughout the season. So this just kind of paraphrases what you need to do and how you do it in order to tissue sample. We have tissue sample bags that we can mail out free of charge. They're paper bags, so you can use a brown paper bag as well. When you're going out to the field to sample, you want to, if you GPS your locations, if you're able to do that, so you can go back to those spots throughout the growing season, try to go out the same time in the day to make your results comparable. When you collect your samples, we suggest you're taking the most recent matured leaf, and you want about 2 cups worth of plant material, so roughly the size of a softball. and you want to avoid any irregular spots. So when you're sampling to monitor your crop, you want to get an area that represents the average area of your field. If you have, if you have irregularities that you're worried about, then we'd suggest you take samples from those areas as well as your good producing areas, so that you have two samples that you're able to look at to see what the difference is, to try to help you determine what's going on in those irregular spots. Once you have your sample, you want to make sure there's no residue on it, no fertilizer or dirt. If you need to, you can lightly wash them off and let them air dry. And then once they're dry, put them into the paper bag. We have submission forms that we want filled out. The big thing with our submission forms is to make sure you identify your crop and you identify your stage that the crop is at. And we have codes that relate to crops and to every growth stage as well. So that's an important part to help with the results. And then you send your sample off to the lab. We suggest you send it overnight, so that, because the plants, to ensure they get there on time and you can get your results back within 24 hours. So within 24 hours of the lab receiving the plants, your results will be emailed back to you.
Amazing.
So this just kind of shows you, we have a full list of all the crops and all the different crop stages to pull your results from, or to pull your sample from. So this is just showing you wheat, the 4 different stages, early bloom up to maturity, and pulling that most recently matured leaf, as well as canola, again, 4 different stages that they can fall into, and from seedling to bud development up to pre-harvest. So we have all that information on our website. We have lots of information on our website, lots of technical information. We have all the codes and all the crops and all the different stages that you need in order to fill out your forms. This is an example of what an analysis looks like, and it just shows you your nutrients. It shows your actual values for those nutrients, as well as the normal range within those nutrients should be, and your ratios on the bottom. And then it shows a graph for the nutrients to show what's deficient, what's very high, and what's at a sufficient level. So it's all broke down. It does say the growth stage on there, heading to maturity. So again, that's something that we have to make sure we do. Another part of our plant tissue testing that we offer is the plant monitoring program. And this program may not be as widely known, but it's a free service that we offer. Basically, it allows you to enroll your field. And if you want to test that field throughout the growing season, every week to 10 days, before we start sending in results, we give your field a unique ID number. And you can go back to that field every 10 days. You submit that unique ID number on your submission form, and we combine that data into one report that looks like this. So it's basically taking your 4 tissue samples that you got done on that one field and putting it all together on one report, so that you can see how the nutrients have changed throughout the growing season. And it shows your values. It shows the dates on the left. This one says June 11th, June 28th, July 5th, August 22nd. So it shows your ranges and where it's going, and then it graphs it on the bottom too as well to show you where it actually falls into, your high level, your low level, and then the sample level that it falls into. So again, this is a free service to get this combined, get your results combined together. So definitely suggest you do that if you do sample more than throughout the growing season. So in terms of our tissue test, PT1 is the code we use to sample for tissue testing, and it is 3360 for the test. For freight, you have to air express it overnight to the lab. If you send 5 or more tissue samples and you use the air express through Purelator, then that cost is free. We will pay for that cost. If you're using any other carrier that you send, or you send less than 5, then that is up to you to pay for the shipping. I just threw this in because this kind of tells you how to read a plant tissue test. We have it on our website. I can email it out to anyone that wants to see it. Basically, it just breaks down how to read it, what everything means, what the ratios mean, and how to read all the values. So it's a useful tool. And I'd said that I'm the rep for Eastern Saskatchewan, Southern Saskatchewan, and all of Manitoba. Noah is the rep for the other side of Saskatchewan, the north and the west, as well as part of Alberta. And then Norm, he lives in BC. He looks after BC and Western Alberta. So if anyone needs any help, you guys can reach out to us, call, phone, text, and we can get you information. There's no cost to open an account. If you don't have an account, we can get that set up and we can get bags sent out to you and all the labels that you need. And that's it. I went really fast, but I know we're short on time, and Dan has some exciting news, so I'll let him share that.
Oh, it's such exciting news, Jill. Thank you for that amazing segue. But appreciate your presentation, very succinct and to the point. And it's an amazing opportunity for producers to see what's in the gas tank for nutrients with their plants. And we want to help everybody with that, specifically those that are using Bio-Sul, and that includes you, my friend Daryl Francu. So the opportunity is we will pay for your tissue test if you submit it under the hashtag Bio-Sul Nation moniker. So simply denote hashtag Bio-Sul Nation on there, or let us know, and we will get that put into a special account that Aberhart Ag Solutions will be covering, the $33.60 per tissue test. And our deal with you under those circumstances is that we also own the data that we can use to show and verify the accuracy and the efficacy of this product. You can already see tons and tons of tissue tests on our website at aberhartagsolutions.ca under tissue tests all across the Bio-Sul Nation in Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and the Alberta folk there with Warringah. They have a lot of tissue tests as well. So we're building up a lot of data points that are becoming more meaningful over time as the acres of this product progress. And with that, I am going to wrap up this webinar because we hit the 1 hour mark and we have a dealer webinar actually starting 3 minutes ago. But I want to thank everybody for coming on board here. Remember that we in agriculture are an essential service, and providing sustainable fertility to everybody here in Western Canadian agriculture has been an honor. We want to thank all of our customers, all of our dealers. I want to thank the panelists for coming on today. And thank you to all the participants. We had 95 people on the call, which is absolutely extraordinary. So I hope that you got value out of it. I hope that you learned something. We are open for business. We are ready to deliver sulphur anytime that you need it. So give myself a call, Greg Cooper, our account manager in Saskatoon, Graham McMurtry, our logistics folk in Regina, and as well you can give Warringah a call in Alberta to get your sulphur needs taken care of. So thanks everybody. Appreciate it. Thank you, Jill, for coming on. So remember, if you want to get your tissue test covered by Aberhart Ag, give us a call or put Bio-Sul Nation on your tissue test and we'll go into that account. That's for dealers and for customers that are using Bio-Sul. Terry, thanks a lot. Elston, thanks as always. We appreciate it. So with that, I'll end this webinar and we'll be hopping on the other call for our dealers here presently. So I'll see my dealers in the private dealer webinar. Thanks, everybody. Good luck with everything this spring. Stay safe and keep producing food to feed the world. We appreciate what you're doing. Thanks so much.
This is Donald Trump, the author of The American Dream and President of the United States of America. Okay? Dan has asked me to give a special message to you. I'm not looking at a teleprompter. I'm just going to go with it, okay? This is very inspiring. It's tremendous. I had my people do the math. You betcha, as you say in the Great North. Amazing people. Love the people. Love the poutine. Please endorse me. Okay, I'm off track now. Back to business. Thank you very much. It's been tremendous. Really, really tremendous. Let's make sulphur great again.